Well, I'm very honored today to welcome to our little studio Zainaba Hawa Bangura, who's the special representative of the Secretary General of the United Nations on violence against women in conflict areas. A huge job, a huge question, and I'm very delighted that she's coming to speak with us about this.
Thank you very much. I'm extremely honored to be able to talk to you, to come and visit Stanford, a beautiful, and thank you very much for the work you have been doing. You are actually an inspiration to a lot of women around the world. My background, I come from a family where I am the first generation to be educated. Both my parents, father and mother, were literate. And obviously, my mother made the determination to get me to school, to be educated, at the anger of my father, who, as a result of that, threw us out at the age of 12 because he thought that the education of a girl is not important. So I think at that very age, I understood and realized what it means to discriminate against a woman. And I went to school through the support of my mother. It's a very difficult circumstances, but she instilled the principle that education is the best thing for your life. And so that discrimination I grew up with, and I think that's what inspired me to be able to work for women's rights. And in this job, I think it's because we had, as you're aware, we went through almost 12 years of civil conflict in Syria, one of the most brutal. I worked for an NGO called Campaign for Good Governance, which I founded and ran for over 5 to 6 years during the course of the conflict. And it was during my period as the head of that organization that I came in contact with women who had been sexually abused in the course of the conflict. 60,000 women were raped during the conflict in Sierra Leone. I documented a lot of their atrocities, their stories, and that's made me become very conscious. Then I spent 2 years in Liberia working for the UN. So obviously I wasn't very surprised when I was nominated, asked to take this job, because definitely my background, my experience was one of the things that actually got me to be nominated for this job. My job, I am the key focal person in the United Nations that provides coherent and strategic leadership. My job was created as a result of a Security Council Resolution 1888 in 2009, which requested the Secretary General to appoint somebody who will provide coherent and strategic leadership with regards to fighting the scourge against sexual violence and conflict. So I lead and coordinate the UN effort. I'm the international voice on that issue, and I provide high-level political advocacy. My mandate is global, from Colombia to Cambodia to Bosnia to Syria to the Central Republic of Congo to Somalia. It's across the country, the world, but I focus on 12 countries because it's a huge problem, and I think to be able to be very strategic, to be able to achieve results, you have to start in a way in which you know you can manage. The 12 countries are Colombia, Bosnia, Democratic Republic of Congo, Central African Republic, South Sudan, Darfur, Sudan, Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia. Then I have Mali, Somalia, Libya, and Syria. These are the 12 countries. I report to the Security Council through the Secretary General. So we prepare an annual report, which actually comes out every March. Last year, we reported on 22 countries, which include Afghanistan, Nepal, and a whole lot of range of other countries. This year, it's possible that we might reduce it to 20 countries, but we have 3 categories of countries. We have conflict countries, we have post-conflict countries, we have countries of interest. These are countries where we feel sexual violence is taking place in very special and unique circumstances. For example, in Egypt, during the demonstrations in Egypt, the political transition. In Kenya, in the process of the democratic election that took place a couple of years ago. And the third, actually 2 other countries. One was in Guinea, where they had massive rape at the stadium during the military governments. And then in Angola, when DRC refugee women were deported back from Angola to the DRC. So we have intervened in some of these countries and work with the government to make sure that they take the necessary action that is required.
And how do you begin? I mean, we have to begin somewhere. It's a massive task, but it's manageable in some senses, I gather from our earlier conversation. Could you give us an example of how you begin in a country to try to make a difference?
What we have been able to do at the international level, we have developed the global legal framework, which started with Resolution 1325, that actually established that conflicts affect women disproportionately than any other population. And that spells out clearly what needs to be done, including a plan of action in any country, the political participation of women, having women in the peace process on the table, empowering women. 8 years later, the Security Council adopted a resolution 1820, which interestingly was a resolution which was chaired by Condoleezza Rice when she was Secretary of State. That resolution recognizes sexual violence as an international peace and security, which requires a peacekeeping, a justice, and a service response. And at the same time, it actually encourages and mandated the various Security Council sanction committees that in imposing sanctions in country, they have to look at where sexual violence has been committed. A year later, they created the infrastructure, which created my office. And interesting, the person who chaired that meeting that created my office was Hillary Clinton a year later. So that's a resolution instructed the Secretary General to create this office, headed by myself, with a team of experts who are specialists that will support national governments, and then with women protection advisors that have special skills that work in the country where the conflicts are taking place. So the important issue is that we have the global legal framework as the United Nations. But United Nations by itself cannot solve this problem. So we have recognized this as a war crime. We have had a resolution discussed, but how do you implement this resolution in countries? Mm-hmm. So what we have tried to do, we have worked, headed by the UK, to create the momentum, the political momentum, and make sure we hold countries accountable. So we started with a declaration by the G8, which recognizes and had a declaration and committed to put resources and effort into fighting sexual violence, because they are its biggest economies, some of the eight biggest economy in the world. Mm-hmm. After that, last year, we had a declaration of commitment, which, as I speak to you, 137 countries have signed it out of the 194 countries of the United Nations, which is they make a commitment to fight sexual violence and to take necessary steps. So what I do with these 12 countries I have listed, I visit countries which started with my predecessor. And one of the things we do is to get a political commitment from the government. So we sign an agreement, we call a joint communique. In that agreement, we spell out what is required that the government needs to do. In some countries, rape is not a crime. Yes. So the first thing is that after we sign, we realize it's not a crime, then it means we have to get the right legislation. Once we are able to do that, we have to have a policy and a strategy how to fight it. Then you have to engage different stakeholders. So once we sign this communique and agreement to do what is necessary, whether it's changing the law, whether it's making sure the police are trained or prosecutes, as soon as I get this agreement, this is followed by the visit by my team of experts who are specialists in the rule of law and sexual violence. They are lawyers, prosecutors, judicial people, but very skilled people on the rule of law and justice. And they now go and sit down and work with the governments.
Now, are you welcomed by these governments? Are they happy to meet with you? And
no, the thing about sexual violence is that it has a culture of denial and silence. Mm-hmm. People refuse to accept that it's actually happening. Mm-hmm. They don't. And so at the end of the day, you have to do a lot of work. And one of the instances, because I also report to the Security Council, people get very angry. You know, once the Security Council takes a decision, you can't say no. Mm-hmm. So I give an instance when I wanted to visit Somalia. Because they had taken to court and prosecuted a woman who claimed that the police had raped her. The government got extremely angry. They arrested her husband, arrested the human rights officer who broke the story, arrested a journalist who wrote the story, arrested a social worker. 5 people were arrested. So I really had to ask for help with Hillary Clinton and the Obama administration, with William Hague and his prime minister and the president of the European Union, because the president was making a tour. The president of Somalia was making a tour. So I connected with all the embassies in New York, and they connected with their headquarters to raise this issue with him to get the Soman release and all the other people. He was extremely angry at me. Eventually, he was forced to release Zuma. So when I asked that I want to visit, they refused. But we had pressure from the international community, especially the UK, that made sure I did the visits. I wasn't able to see any of them because they're not in the country. And I think in a way it was deliberate. But eventually we walked, we met the president, we signed an agreement with him. And today I can tell you he's a very good friend of mine. He doesn't like it, but he has to do it.
This was one case, one woman that you followed up, but would open a panoply of other cases, no doubt. In that case, for example, can you measure change? Maybe not yet.
The change specifically is that the government recognizes and accepted the sexual violence has taken place, because they were saying, no, it's wrong, even though we had a list, 1,700 women had been raped the previous year in the 503 refugee camps in Mogadishu. But the government said it's wrong, no rape is taken place. No rape is taken place. So that's one example, because we changed the narrative.
Yes.
The government had to accept ownership that the rape is taken place, and they had to request help from us. And we signed an agreement with them, and now we are in the process of implementing the agreement to make sure that we actually implement the actions that they have to. We have to change the law in Somalia. There is no law that's actually is against sexual violence, prosecute sexual violence. The other case we also had was the DRC, because as you know, the DRC was called the city of rape.
Absolutely.
And so it was very difficult when I took the job, because my predecessor had gone there 3 times. And the Secretary General, who is very particular about this issue, had gone there, and he couldn't get a response from the president. Yeah. So today I can say to you, 1, the president addressed the Senate and announced to the country that he is going to commit himself to fighting on sexual violence. He's going to appoint a personal representative in his office that is going to be responsible for working on the issue of sexual violence, as well as child soldiers. He's going to set up a special court within the justice system to deal with war crimes and sexual violence. He's given amnesty to some of the people who fought in the war, but he's excluded sexual violence and war crime. He's taken very concrete steps that nobody thought 2 years ago President Kabila could do. I addressed the Senate as part of my advocacy. The Senate has set up a special committee working on sexual violence. I addressed all the military, the police officers in the entire country. They have a unit of police officers, and appointed a woman colonel for the first time. The highest ranking woman in the police is dealing with this issue of sexual violence. The military has set up a committee, because I met the Minister of Defense. So I engaged different stakeholders, and now all of them are on board. And I said to them, you have to lead. This is not my problem. This is not my country. And these are your women. This is your country. And I think it is important for you to recognize that. So everybody is astonished as the advances we're making in the DRC. So the commitment has to be there. The leadership has to own it. We in the UN cannot do it, because they have the primary moral and legal responsibility to protect their citizens. So my job is to make sure that they take that responsibility very seriously, and to work with them step by step to take the necessary actions. Sexual violence in conflict is a human rights issue. And I think it has a reflection of how society treats its women. But it's a crime that has to be punishable. And I think, coming from Sierra Leone and my background, I do believe, I'm convinced that it's not something that we cannot deal with. But we have to have the strength and the political will to address it. And my message I said to all of those women in these countries around the world, I said, if you can do it in Sierra Leone, where 60,000 women were raped, where rape was not a crime, today we have one of the most progressive laws in Sierra Leone on sexual violence. We have a special court in Sierra Leone that deals with gender-based violence, Saturday courts. We have special magistrate trained. We have special units in each and every police station where women can go and report. We call it the family support units. We have witness protection support that provides support to victims and survivors. And I therefore do believe that this is a crime we must fight and we can fight. And the international community has agreed that wherever perpetrators are, whoever they are, will go after them. That's what my office is. Mm-hmm. And we work with people around the world, especially women. But this is not a battle that I can fight alone. It's a battle that we have to have national legislators because they make the laws. It's a battle that we need to have the religious leaders to join because this is a moral issue. I mean, women constitute over 50% of the population of each and every country. In a country like Somalia, there's 60% of the population. If you don't respect your women, you can't protect them during conflict, you will not be able to respect them during peace. And they are a resource which is needed for the development of any country because they produce over 60% of the food in Africa. They're responsible for putting over 100% of the food on the table. And therefore, it's a resource which if you don't take care of and protect, is going to affect your country. We have to have Japan today. I visited Japan at the invitation of the Prime Minister. Today he's changing the issue because he realizes that there's been a stagnation in the development process of Japan because women have not been effectively included. So he's changing it and he's spending money, billions around the world for the empowerment of women. He's going to be one of the biggest donors to UN Women. He's putting in nearly 10 million on sexual violence in conflict because he's realized all of a sudden, I need my women because if they don't contribute in the economy of my country, I will not move above where I am. I've stagnated. So it's a human rights issue. It's a health issue because the damage committed to women, you don't even start talking about of HIV, all kind of diseases, and the damage in which it causes with fistula and everything. It's an economic issue. Women bring more resources on the table. So it's a social issue. A rape is not just against an individual. It's against a family. It's against a community. So it's a social issue. So at the end of the day, because of all the consequences, I think it is important that we deal with it. And I want to send a message to every woman around the world that we're there for you. That wherever you are, whoever rapes you, you can be rest assured we'll go after that person.
When we were talking earlier, you made a short comment, and I said, how can you enter, how can you really move in to actually deal with this? And you said, where there's a command, you can control. And here you were referring to situations where rape is being used as a weapon of war. And could you just comment on that in general? And that's a very interesting point you made.
One of the things that one of the 6 goals that I establish in my office is the recognition of rape as a weapon of war. It doesn't happen by accident. It's premeditated, it's planned. Somebody somewhere gives the command because they want to either degrade, dehumanize, humiliate a particular part of society to teach them a lesson, to all sorts of things to do with them. And therefore, we believe if it is commanded, it can be controlled. And I think we saw that in the DRC. When I started working in the DRC, the FARDC, which is the national military, and the police actually commits almost 50% of the rape. When we started working with the military, we made a commitment to them that you need to take the necessary action that will ensure that what has happened does not happen anymore. And even if it happens, you'll be in a position to control it. Mm-hmm. And the reason why we said that, because the year before, the military had committed mass rape in a village called Minova, where 130 women had been raped because when the military was retreating after a military defeat, The issue is still being investigated. The UN is supporting it. The entire international community put pressure on the DRC to take action on this rape case. It was at this time that I intervened working with the Ministry of Defense and the military forces. So we told them that next time you face the situation, the thing you need to do is to give the command, which President Kabila did in the Senate, gave the instruction to the leadership of the military that whoever commits rape, you have to investigate, you have to prosecute them. And for all those who are being prosecuted, you have to fast track the prosecution so that we let them know that this is not acceptable. So when they wanted to go into battle a year after, that instruction was given together with the instruction by the president, the force commander. And we saw after that battle, the number of rape that took place was so low because the message had gone to them that this is a crime. If you commit it, we will investigate. If we investigate and you are found guilty, we will prosecute you. And the responsibility is also on the commanders themselves to make sure that if your troop commits the rape, you are going to be held responsible, which will affect your promotion, your movement within the military. So that's why we believe that if it is commanded, then we can also control it. And that's the strategy we are using, working with them, engaging them, and making sure that we know who they are, where they are, and we can hold them responsible.
One of the things that struck me as we were speaking earlier and just now again is hard to remember, but you remind us that the people we are dealing with are human beings. I mean, they can be reasoned with, perhaps. They're not just monsters. Maybe some of them are, but you remind us that this is a way of interacting, attempting to communicate, and getting through to people who are ultimately human beings.
One of the I don't want to say powers, the responsibility given to me is to engage state and non-state actors, which means government functionary and even local militia and rebel groups, as long as they are not like a terrorist group. So I have the opportunity. And one of the things we have tried to do is sit down with the military, the leadership and the command to let them know that, you know what, if you commit this crime, this is the consequences. And some of them don't understand, don't know because they've been in the forest fighting that it is actually a war crime. Mm-hmm. And so once the ICC goes with the leadership, we go after them and we talk to them. I have two short instances in the case of Sierra Leone after the conflict ended. When the peace agreement was signed, the conflict was still ongoing, but the peace agreement had been signed, and it was just difficult to get these commanders and military people to just stop committing the rape and fighting. So we were able to assemble all the commanders of the different warring factions, and at that meeting and training, we brought victims, women victims, and we brought child soldiers to tell their stories to these commanders, what you did with me. And I can tell you at that meeting, some of the commanders had tears coming down their eyes. Because when you are in a battlefield, I don't want to say how you are in drugs, you are hyperactive, you are giving command. You don't sit down to think for 1 minute the consequences. But when you sit down in a closed door room with none of your bodyguards in your trip, and you see a woman sitting and saying, listen, this was what happened to me, this was why I was captured. This was what they did to me. This was what I suffered. This was how I felt. This is where I am today. And the child soldiers talking. Some of those commanders sat and tears were coming down their eyes. By the time we finished the meeting, the workshop and training, we had them sign commitments, what not to do. And we held them to that commitment. The other example is in the DRC where we're working, where a local militia is chief of staff, senior person to the local militia, actually committed rape. And we got in touch with the commander. We said, you have to give him to us. If you don't, this is where you will end up in terms of your resources, the sanctions, the ICC prosecution, everything. Eventually, he himself handed over the individual who had committed this crime. So that is why the interaction and engagement is very important. They are human beings. They have mothers. I mean, they have sisters. They have daughters. So I say to them when I address military people, I say to them, how would you feel if your mother is raped? How would you feel if your wife is raped or your daughter is raped? I said, I'm sure you will kill the person who did. You have to remember this is somebody's mother, somebody's daughter, somebody's sister. Your job is to protect them because that's what you have to protect as military people. So once you get to talk to them, you pin them down. Eventually, you get them to understand that it's a crime. And I think inevitably what we have found, they take the necessary action that is needed.
My final question is no doubt unnecessary, but it is, are you hopeful?
Yes, I am. I am because I think we've come a long way. And I think the understanding is now there around the world that this is something that we have to deal with. It is not a byproduct of war. It is not inevitable. It's planned. And people now know the consequences. So we just have to work much harder to be able to get there. But I do believe that anything that you need, you have to fight for. And I think that's what we're doing. So I'm extremely hopeful that there will come a time when the only place we read about this is in the history books.
Thank you so much, Zainaba.
Thank you.